Think beyond traditional business banking. Think a partner that gives you in-depth financial insights.
Well, good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this week's Power Table. As Godfrey did say before we went to the break, the discussion that we are having today is BRICS and business. Just reflecting whether the participation of the Business Council has been one that has worked, in a sense. So we are looking back at the fact that the 15th summit is currently underway here in Johannesburg. And as I said, the question we are asking is whether BRICS Business Council and BRICS has been beneficial for the corporate sector. You'll remember that the Business Council in and of itself was established around 10 years ago, and it was established to promote and strengthen business, trade and investment ties in the emerging markets cluster. And as BRICS now looks to potentially welcome more members, with around 40 countries having expressed interest or formally having applied to join the bloc, we are asking what this will mean for the future of how the Business Council operates and goes about its business. I am joined at the table this week by Colin Coleman, who is a distinguished fellow at Insead and also the former partner at Goldman Sachs. Also, Aleksei Kechko, the head of strategy over at VEB.RF, as well as Leslie Maustop, the vice president and the chief financial officer over at the New Development Bank, who will be joining us a little later. Gentlemen, to the both of you, thanks so much for joining us in studio. So, Colin, I'm going to ask you to kick off the discussion for us, because essentially the BRICS Business Council was established in the time when you still were MD over at Goldman Sachs, South Africa. In your view, has the Business Council, and I suppose more specifically, has BRICS been good for business?
Well, definitely what you're seeing with BRICS is you're seeing the development of a new power structure in the world. It's changing the architecture of the world geopolitical system. And certainly China's rise has been the dominant feature of it. What you see with regards to the business relationships, and as a veteran of the BRICS Business Council, I'm no longer involved with it, but I watch it closely. These business is really about relationships. Sure. At the end of the day. So what it's provided is a network and an interaction. At Goldman Sachs, I used to go to China. I've been probably 20 times since 2008, and was involved with various transactions like the ICBC acquisition of the stake in Standard Bank. And it's very much doing transactions, building business relationships. It's very much about relationships and networks. So this provides a very good ongoing set of relationships. And you see some of the faces that have featured over the last 10 years, and then there are new faces. So it's very good to see. I was at the BRICS Business Forum yesterday, to see the interaction and also the development. I think there's some changes which are also reflective of global developments. In particular, I'd say the themes that stood out for me was renewable energy, technological innovation, particularly in areas like agriculture, and fintech. These are developments that have really risen in the last 10 years. So the nature of those relationships change.
I want to get more on your thoughts of recently, as you said yesterday, the BRICS Business Forum in just a short while. Aleksei, I want to come to you because probably you are one of the new faces that Colin is seeing right now from his days at the time when the BRICS Business Council was established up until now. And I know that VEB, State Development Finance Institution, so probably like the Industrial Finance Corporation or the Industrial Development Corporation here in South Africa. So you have a really good perception of how a business has been operating under this BRICS cluster. And just from your viewpoint, would you say that BRICS has been good for business or not?
I think it is very good. We can see that, for instance, for Russia, we now trade with BRICS even more than with other countries.
Sure.
There was an increase in 40% just last year. So it's important for us to gather together and discuss important issues in finance, in settlements, and in trade. So this is how we use these forums. And we see as our mutual economic relations grow, that this is success.
All right, so very good. And so let's then go back to what happened yesterday. Yesterday, of course, being day one of the 15th BRICS summit. You were saying that interesting conversations did stand out to you regarding agricultural technology, digital economy. Also, what was discussed are matters around infrastructure as well as further market access. So perhaps just expand a little bit more on some of those conversations and comments that did stand out to you from yesterday.
Well, there was two standouts for me. One was the Chinese explained how big smaller micro enterprises are in the development of their economy.
Sure.
And they have a 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 description of it. But effectively what they're saying is that it represents a huge amount of their GDP, it represents a huge amount of their employment, the job creation, their innovation, their research expenditure. And India was talking a lot about the role of fintech and mobile payments. My experience, including in Africa, is that when you have significant disparities that we have in our economy, in emerging markets, like in places like India and other parts of Africa, the banking systems are not developed, or the banking systems are quite selective. So,
Sure.
So a place like Nigeria, for example, the banking systems really focus on corporates. And they invest heavily, they basically take deposits from individuals and they invest heavily in government bonds, which are yielding, because of high interest rates, huge returns. And that's the model of banking. But that leaves individuals unbanked. So mobile payment systems and fintech is really stepping into that vacuum. And what you're seeing is a significant wave of the ability of these mobile payment systems, the most famous of which is M-Pesa,
Sure.
providing effectively the transmission belt from individuals to making these payments. So the Indian example, it was quite clear from India, and you know that they are the fastest growing amongst the BRICS economies, that they are resurgent, they are surging forward. And the whole area of technological innovation is helping them leapfrog their energy systems, their mobile payment systems, and that is having dramatic unlocking potential fulfilled for their economies.
I've got to take a jab at you. Sorry, Colin, just
No,
given what you're talking about right now, you're talking about banks, and perhaps you're talking about the relative conservatives of the existing banks, and you're also highlighting some of the innovations that have come out of the financial sector as a result of perhaps banks turning away what they seemed to be risky clients at the time away. Just the benefit of hindsight now that you are outside of Goldman Sachs, what would that benefit of hindsight be towards banks in the BRICS right now, and how they should be approaching SMEs as you were talking about, and perhaps even looking at other opportunities?
Well, remember, I was in a global investment bank.
Sure.
Goldman Sachs is a global investment. It's not a universal bank. That's a commercial bank providing credit to individuals and smaller micro enterprises. But that is a phenomenon. I would say that global banks, and most of those are Wall Street banks, are highly effective, but also very highly selective in credit, who they provide credit to, and so on. So they tend to cherry pick. The commercial banks that are, the likes of Standard Bank and First Rand and others, are operating very effectively, I would say, in the African context. But if you look at the local banks in many of these countries, they're not really providing this credit. And in South Africa, the criticism would be that the likes of these banks that I've mentioned have not effectively gone downstream.
Sure.
And what's happened is you've had the rise of Capitec, they've
Once a startup now.
Yeah, they're
amongst the
effectively
big
at
five.
a $0 to $12 billion market cap in 20 years.
Sure.
Same with Discovery. Discovery is this innovation. So, my friends in government, when they talk to me about the lack of competition in financial services, I give them stick, because the financial services sector is amongst the most competitive sectors. And if you don't fulfill the needs of customers, somebody will. And fintech is providing this transmission belt to do it.
Aleksei, just some of your highlights from the first day one yesterday of the BRICS Business Forum. I do know that you sat on a panel discussion and you were looking at the just energy transition, but your key takeaways or even your input on the framework of the just transition.
So when we yesterday discussed just transition, I know you have issues here with energy balance in South Africa, and as many other countries have in developing world, because your needs grow very quickly and you don't have adequate infrastructure. And in this regard, as everyone is trying to be now renewable, to meet net zero goals, it's very difficult to do that when you need more and more energy and at the same time to rebuild your current infrastructure. So what we did in Russia, we shifted to transitional taxonomy. This is called an additional measures which also give benefit to projects which are not green exactly. So they're not renewable as such, but they provide better climate effects on one hand. They are more efficient, they are affordable, and we can do them today, in a year or 3 years, not in 5, 10 years. So I think this is what South Africa and other developing countries should be looking at. And also they should look not as new sources of energy, but also at conventional ones, like nuclear power. Yes, it is not renewable, but it's clear and it gives you affordable energy, creates jobs here, creates new industry. So this is one thing you also may take a look at together with your regulators and add to your taxonomy these chapters about other sources of energy. And it is called transitional chapter.
Can I ask you a question that you also had to face during the discussion yesterday, and it was around the geopolitical tensions and the potential that this could have on countries, the BRICS, and even the broader world, as it were, backsliding on some of its commitments towards climate. Just your take on that.
So I think some developed countries have already been backsliding, even before this crisis. They committed themselves back in 2015 that they will provide around $100 billion per annum to developing countries to make this transition to green energy. And what we see, they provided around $83 billion in 2000, but these were not subsidies. So this was not for free, these were mostly loans at rather high interest rates, which need to be repaid. And it's very untransparent what these loans achieved, in fact. And I think later when we go to Brazil in 2025, it will be very important to take a new look at this system, to require larger investments and at more affordable terms to developing countries.
Could I just say something? I think you know, the current conflicts in the world have sharpened tensions around energy. And what that means as well is that you look at Germany and France. In my prior involvement in banking, I was at JP Morgan in their utilities group in London at an earlier stage of my career. And we used to spend a lot of time in Germany with RWE, Weber, VEAG, which is now E.ON, talking about their energy systems. And essentially what they are starting to do is to retract their commitment to exit nuclear, and they're coming back into nuclear because they want to secure energy independence. So this whole tension that is currently in the world has caused people to re-examine, as is South Africa, their independent energy strategy. And I agree with Aleksei that we need to be smart in our choices. You know, in Africa, just to quickly say, diesel and the rise of diesel and the rise of diesel cartels that corruptly capture the supply of diesel in the absence of energy means that it's the most polluting and the most expensive for the countries. So almost any other energy source is better for these countries than diesel. So whether it's gas, whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal, and obviously we have, for climate purposes, we have to transition away from coal, but you can't abandon it because in our system it's 90% of the energy mix at the moment.
It's such a contentious one on coal. You can't abandon it, but the question always arises, at what point do you? And especially given the position of a certain financial institution saying that at this point they might not be financing new coal. And yes, yet as a continent we are left with these large coal deposits, and it raises question marks as to what to do about them?
You know, somebody, Mike Brown, the Nedbank CEO, coined a very nice phrase. He said the glide path. We have to have a glide path from where we are to where we want to be, and we have to get there in a smart way. So there's going to be an inevitable tensions in this, but we have to see gas solutions. We have to get, for South Africa, very fast fixing of the energy supply system, because it's systemic. As I said in 2017, that Eskom was our biggest systemic risk in South Africa. Yeah. And unless we fix our energy mix and the supply to be surplus to our demand, we're going to have this ongoing load shedding problem.
Energy independence being a topic that was discussed, but also currency independence. What stood out for me yesterday was the re-emphasis by the Brazilian President Lula da Silva around the importance of de-dollarization in his view. Just talking about not necessarily doing away with local currency, but perhaps having a reference currency or a BRICS currency as it is being spoken about. Aleksei, perhaps just your view on a BRICS currency and whether you reckon it can improve the ease of doing business in the bloc or not.
So we currently have several concepts of what BRICS currency can be. Sure. We haven't decided yet, so it will be a very long path for us. But we already do trade in local currencies where it is possible, where trade balance is more or less neutral. Say with China, we try to trade in yuans. With India, we try to deal in their local currencies, in Indian rupees. But if there is disbalance, and it is often the case in bilateral relations, there are difficulties. So what BRICS needs to do is to agree on a step forward, what concept we choose. Either we go like European Union did, and they agreed for one currency, but it's difficult because it requires a unification of the authorities, financial authorities in those countries. Or we try to make possible to settle on those currencies, to make them exchangeable, to make certain common rules. These are very important questions, and it is very good that our presidents, they are trying to push forward to resolve these issues.
As an ex-investment banker, just your view on the de-dollarization debate in the BRICS currency?
I'll be blunt. I don't think it's realistic in the short term to de-dollarize. The dollar is by way, the largest currency in the world. Over 2/3 of the world's currencies are traded in dollars. Leslie Marsdorp, who was going to be on this program last night, was saying that in the constitution of the new development bank, dollar is the currency that they use, and the biggest pool available for issuance. So if you're an issuer, you have to use dollars by and large, because that's the biggest pool of demand is in dollars. But having said all that, there was one person yesterday at the BRICS Forum who gave a very interesting exposition as a person doing business in 30 countries in Africa, sure. How the fact is that they're dealing with very high interest rates, and at the same time, currency depreciation in countries like Nigeria, where the Nigerian naira has gone from roughly 400 to roughly 750 naira to the dollar in no time. And so if they have obligations in dollars, they are facing the twin problem of high interest rates and currency depreciation. Sure. So from a business point of view, finding the balance, and essentially business people would be best advised to use currency, their local currency, and borrow in local currency, not have foreign currency exposures. In South Africa, the one thing that has saved South Africa in our current economic malaise is the fact that only 15% of our currency obligations is dollars, yeah, or foreign currency. The balance is in local currency. So our financial system is very, very important. And the fact that we have liquid capital markets is very defensive to South Africa.
I've got around 1.5 minutes left for this conversation. I just want your quick thoughts on BRICS expansion and whether that will be good for business. Aleksei? Of course, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he's very much welcoming of new friends at government level, but at business level, do you reckon that will be a good idea?
I think in general this is a very good idea to add new countries and more business, because when we are together we can strengthen our positions, we can do mutual business better, but we'll see how it goes on, because it's not easy to add them to the existing structure so that it's still efficient and we can still come to concrete solutions.
Sure. Different cultural nuances, different language nuances, but I mean, is that easy to get over?
Look, I think the reality is that China is 70% of the BRICS formation in terms of GDP contribution today. So it's quite efficient for 5 leaders to meet. I have a slightly different view. When you get, let's say, 20 leaders meeting, it's going to be much more difficult to manage. So if you're going to add people that make a significant difference, that materially move the needle.
Saudi Arabia?
And Saudi Arabia might be one of them. Indonesia, big populations, big economies will make a difference. I don't believe small countries are going to add very much to the mix.
Okay. Gentlemen, with that said, thanks so much for joining us on this week's Power Table, just giving us your take on the efficacy of the BRICS grouping and its impact on business. Unfortunately, Mr. Leslie Mastrop, the Vice President and the CFO at the New Development Bank, was unable to join us. He was actually currently held up in a plenary session with the heads of state at the BRICS summit, which is underway right now. But perhaps we catch some thoughts from him next time. But I would like to say one last goodbye to my studio guest. That's Colin Coleman, the Distinguished Fellow over at Insead and Former Partner at Goldman Sachs, as well as Aleksei Kechko, the Head of Strategy at VE.RF. And that wraps up the Power Table for today. Thanks, as always, for watching. And of course, it also wraps up Power Lunch Southern Africa.
A banking partner that thinks bigger to guide your business growth.